The air was thick with the smell of fresh-cut flowers. The muted buzz of voices around the room made it feel like I was walking through a dream. The morning was over, but the pain of Dad's sudden death still lingered. It had only been 2 weeks since the accident, 2 weeks since everything changed, and I was left with a void that felt impossible to fill. I had always been close to my father, the kind of father who was both a source of wisdom and an unshakable presence in my life, the kind of father who was supposed to stay with you forever, guiding you when you faltered and being there when you needed him the most. But now he was gone, and I was left to face the harsh reality of living in a world where he no longer existed. I glanced over at my sister, Emma, who was sitting at the head of the table in the lawyer's office. She looked composed, as always, wearing that distant expression she often put on when dealing with anything business. It was as if she could switch off her emotions whenever it suited her. I could never do that. Maybe that's why we were so different. The lawyer, Mr. Collins, a man in his mid-50s who always looked as though he had too many things on his mind, cleared his throat. The small, ornate office seemed colder than usual, its high ceilings and dark wood paneling making the room feel oppressive. "Shall we proceed?" he asked, looking directly at Emma. She nodded, her eyes scanning the papers in front of her, and I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. I could feel the tension in the room, a thick layer of anticipation that clung to everything. This was the moment where Dad's wishes would be made clear. The moment where my future, and Emma's, would be defined by what he had left behind. Mr. Collins unsealed the envelope containing the will and unfolded the paper, adjusting his glasses. "As per the late Mr. Dawson's will, I will now read the contents." He paused, then began. "I, Nathaniel Dawson, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament, revoking all previous versions. To my daughter, Emma Dawson, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to all financial assets, property, and personal belongings." The words hit me like a slap in the face. I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't think I was prepared for any of this, but this was different. Emma had always been the more assertive one, the one who always knew what to do, the one who never hesitated to take control of a situation. But Dad had always been my rock. I had spent countless hours with him, learning from him, sharing quiet moments that meant more to me than anything else in the world. I had assumed that in the end, his will would reflect that connection. But here we were. The lawyer continued reading, his voice a monotone that seemed to make everything even more surreal. "To my daughter, Lucy Dawson," he read, "I leave nothing. There are no specific bequests to Lucy Dawson in this will. However, I have made provision for her in a separate trust, the details of which are outlined below." A chill ran through me, freezing the blood in my veins. No specific bequests. The words echoed in my mind, a harsh, painful reminder that my father had decided, in his final moments, that I wasn't deserving of any part of his legacy. Not even a mention of the things we had shared. It was all gone, swept away in the simplicity of a few words. Emma didn't react. She simply stared at the lawyer, her face blank, as though she had anticipated this. I didn't know whether she had, or if she was simply better at hiding her emotions. But I could tell that this wasn't the outcome she had hoped for either. She had always been protective of me, even if her method of showing it wasn't always the most obvious. This, however, felt different. Mr. Collins paused and shuffled through the papers before speaking again. "The trust set aside for Lucy Dawson includes provisions for her financial well-being. It will be administered by Emma Dawson until Lucy reaches the age of 35, at which point it will be transferred fully to her. Until that time, Emma will have authority over the funds, though it is understood that she will act in the best interests of her sister." The words seemed to float around the room, filling the empty spaces. I felt numb. I had known for a while that Dad's will was going to be complicated. He had made things difficult for years with his quiet detachment and cryptic behavior, but I hadn't expected this. Nothing like this. The trust was a cold consolation prize, a promise that wasn't a promise at all. How could I accept it? How could I reconcile the fact that Emma would control everything, everything that should have been mine too? When the reading ended, Mr. Collins looked up at both of us, his expression professional but concerned. If there are any questions or concerns, now would be the time to address them. Emma stood up, her voice steady. "No, I don't think there's anything to discuss. It's all clear." She turned to me, offering a brief smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lucy, if you want, we can talk later, but right now it seems pretty straightforward." I nodded, though every part of me was screaming. "Straightforward," I repeated quietly, though I couldn't even bring myself to look at her. How could she be so calm? How could she be so unaffected by this? I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask how Dad could have left me with nothing. But the words didn't come. Mr. Collins began to pack up his papers, and I felt the oppressive weight of the moment settle around me. I stood up slowly, moving toward the door, my mind a swirling mess of emotions. There had to be more to it. There had to be something Dad had left for me. I couldn't... No, I wouldn't believe that everything between us had been reduced to nothing. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a jolt of reality. I looked over at Emma, who was already on her phone, organizing the details of Dad's estate. I wanted to ask her if she was as confused and hurt as I was, but I knew the answer. She wasn't. She never was. I could feel the distance between us growing with each passing second. It was always this way. She was always the one who had everything under control, while I was the one left trying to put the pieces together. I couldn't shake the thought of what had just happened. I felt the urge to run, to escape the reality of it all, but I knew that wouldn't change anything. I would have to find out what Dad really meant. I had to understand why he'd done this, why he'd left me with nothing. But in that moment, as I walked away from the lawyer's office and into the chill of the early afternoon, I didn't have any answers, only questions, and the overwhelming sense that something wasn't right. The days following the reading of Dad's will were a blur. Everything felt like it was slipping through my fingers. My mind, my emotions. Nothing seemed to hold any weight anymore. It was as if the world had tilted on its axis, and I had been left behind, standing still while everyone else moved on. Emma, in her usual way, seemed to handle everything with precision and focus. She took over the role of executor with the same calmness that she approached everything else in life. I couldn't blame her. She was always the one who knew what needed to be done, even when it was hard. I, on the other hand, was lost. I couldn't help but feel that the one thing that tied me to Dad, the one thing I thought would be there for me, was gone. I spent most of the next few days at home, going through Dad's old belongings, sorting through the items that Emma had already discarded or packed away. It was a futile attempt to find something, anything, that could explain the man I had thought I knew so well. The shelves in his study were lined with books I had seen 1,000 times, but I hadn't realized how many of them he had read. I ran my fingers over the spines of each book, wondering if perhaps one of them contained a hidden message, a letter, something that would clarify why I was left with nothing. I had expected to feel something more than this emptiness, this hollow void, but I didn't. It was as if Dad had never been here at all. I shuffled through boxes of old paperwork, photographs, and trinkets, but none of it made sense. None of it gave me the answers I was desperately searching for. Then, on the third day, I found something that made my heart stop. A small, fragile envelope tucked away in the corner of a drawer in the master bedroom. It was an envelope with my name written on it, in Mom's handwriting. The ink was smudged in places, as though she had written it in a hurry. My hands trembled slightly as I picked it up, unsure of what I would find inside. I hadn't expected anything from Mom. She had passed away 3 years ago, and I thought everything was settled between us. There were no secrets. But this was different. I hesitated before opening the letter, as if doing so would somehow break some unspoken barrier between me and the past. I had already been through the turmoil of losing Dad, and now I was faced with the possibility that there was still something that had been hidden from me all along. The moment I unfolded the letter, a chill swept through me. The words were written in her familiar looping script, the kind of handwriting that had always made me feel like I was being wrapped in a soft blanket. I could almost hear her voice in my head as I read her words. Lucy, my darling girl, if you are reading this, then it means that I am no longer with you. I've written this letter for you now, as I've known for some time that I wouldn't be able to tell you in person. There are things in life that you don't always understand until much later, and there are reasons for the decisions we make. When I was diagnosed with my illness, I knew that I had to make plans for the future. Your father and I never talked about such things, never about what would happen to our things, to our legacy. We lived in the moment. But as time went on, I realized that there were things I needed to prepare you for, even if you didn't understand them right now. I am leaving you something, my dear, something that belongs to you and only you. It is not much in the way of material wealth, but it is valuable in a way that I hope you will one day understand. It is a collection of jewelry, pieces I've carefully gathered over the years, each one with its own story. Each one has been passed down through generations in our family, and now it is yours to keep and cherish. There is a safety deposit box at the bank, where I have kept these pieces, and the key is attached to this letter. When the time is right, I hope you will open it and learn the history of these items, of our family, and perhaps of yourself. Please know that this is my way of ensuring that a part of me will always be with you. The value of these pieces is not in their price, but in the memories they hold. They are a reminder of who you are and where you come from. I love you always, and I hope that when the time comes, you will cherish this gift as much as I have cherished you. With all my love, Mom. I sat there, stunned. The letter seemed to weigh more than it should have, as if its significance was too heavy for me to bear in that moment. I read it again, slower this time, trying to absorb every word, every feeling that poured out from the pages. Mom had known. She had known that I would need something to hold on to when she was gone. But why hadn't she told me about it before? Why hadn't she shared this with me when she was still here? There were so many unanswered questions, so many things left unsaid. The grief that had been building up inside me for the past few years felt even more unbearable now. Not only had I lost my father, but now I realized that I had never truly understood my mother's quiet strength. The very thing I needed, something that would connect me to her, to our family's past, had been right in front of me all along, hidden in a safety deposit box. I stood up, my hands shaking as I tucked the letter and the key into my pocket. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to find that box. I had to uncover whatever secrets lay within it. The next day I drove to the bank. The air felt heavy as I stepped out of my car and walked into the building, the key clutched tightly in my hand. The clerk at the counter greeted me with a smile that quickly faded when she saw the expression on my face. I handed her the key without saying a word. She led me to a small room in the back, where the safety deposit boxes were kept. The room was cold and sterile, its bright fluorescent lights casting an almost clinical glow over everything. She unlocked the small metal box and handed it to me without a word. My heart pounded as I held the box in my hands. It felt weighty, heavy with history, though I couldn't tell what was inside. As I opened the box, I was met with a collection of items. Small, intricately designed pieces of jewelry. Necklaces, bracelets, rings, each one beautifully crafted, each one more stunning than the last. I recognized some of them from pictures, from stories Mom had told me when I was a child, but others were new to me. Pieces that had been passed down through generations, each with its own story, its own meaning. I lifted one of the rings, a delicate band with a small, glimmering diamond, and turned it over in my fingers. There, etched into the inside, was a date. An anniversary date. Mom had mentioned it once, a long time ago. It was the day my great-grandparents had been married. It was then that I understood what Mom had meant. These pieces were more than just jewelry. They were a connection to the past, a bridge between generations, a legacy that had been carefully preserved. The tears came then. Unexpected, overwhelming. I sank to the floor, holding the jewelry close to me. Mom had done this for me. She had made sure that when the world felt like it was falling apart, when everything seemed uncertain, I would have something to hold on to. I wasn't alone. Not really. As I sat there, the weight of everything I had lost and everything I had gained began to settle over me. The letter, the key, the jewelry, they were more than just things. They were pieces of a larger story, one that I was only beginning to understand. As the weeks passed, the silence between Emma and I slowly started to dissolve. There was no grand reconciliation, no sudden revelation that would change everything, but a shift, imperceptible at first, began to take place. I had shared my feelings with her, opened up about my fears, and she had listened. More than I had expected. Emma didn't always understand, but she was willing to try, and that, in itself, was enough. I had spent hours, days, with the jewelry. I found myself entranced by the stories that each piece held. I spent late nights tracing the intricate engravings, staring at the delicate gemstones as though they might whisper the secrets of our past. My mother had left me a bridge to the past, yes, but it was also a map for the future. She had given me the tools to understand who I was, to grasp the deeper meaning of our family's legacy. It was no longer about the jewels or the fortune they might represent. It was about family, about continuity, about memory. Still, something gnawed at me. Despite the slow thawing of the tension between Emma and me, there was a feeling of disquiet, an unease that lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake off. I had been so focused on my own journey, on the significance of the inheritance, that I hadn't fully considered the impact it might have on Emma. She had always been the practical one, the one who dealt with things head-on, and in a way, I admired that about her. She was the one who had dealt with Dad's will, managing everything with an efficiency that I could never match. But this inheritance wasn't just something we could split or divide up like Dad's assets. It wasn't just about ownership. And deep down, I knew that Emma would never see it the way I did. The day of the family gathering arrived unexpectedly. Emma had invited me, calling me earlier in the week and asking if I wanted to come over for dinner. I wasn't sure what to expect. Emma rarely called to check in or suggest family time. It was something that had become a rare occurrence over the years. Yet, something told me that this dinner wasn't just about catching up. The evening was colder than usual, and I shivered as I pulled my coat tighter around myself. I arrived at Emma's house a little earlier than I had intended, unsure of what the night would bring. The house felt warm, comforting even, but as I stepped through the door, I felt a sense of unease settle in my stomach. Emma was in the kitchen, her back to me as she stirred a pot on the stove. She turned when she heard my footsteps. "Hey, Lucy, I'm glad you came," she said, her smile warm but tinged with something I couldn't place. I smiled back, though the smile felt a little forced. "Of course," I replied, my voice quiet. "Thanks for inviting me." We made small talk as I settled into a chair at the kitchen table. Emma's house had always been immaculate, neat in a way that felt almost staged. There was no clutter, no mess. Everything had its place, and I envied that about her. It felt like she had everything in control, even when she didn't. But tonight, I could sense a shift. There was something different in the air, something hanging between us, unspoken yet palpable. "So," Emma began after a long silence, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about Mom's jewelry and what it means to you." I nodded, unsure where this conversation was going. "Yeah, I appreciate you hearing me out, Em. It's been a lot. Finding those pieces, the history behind them, it's overwhelming, but in a way, it's comforting. I feel like I've connected with something I didn't even realize I needed." Emma's eyes darkened slightly as she looked at me. "I get that, I really do. But there's something I think we need to discuss. Something that's been on my mind ever since that day when you showed me the jewelry." I blinked, my heart picking up pace. I hadn't anticipated this. "What do you mean?" I asked carefully, leaning forward. "Well," she hesitated, "I've been looking into the pieces too. I've been trying to understand the history, the significance of it all. I guess I've realized that there's more to this than I first thought. But there's one thing I need to ask you. One thing that I don't understand." My pulse quickened. What was she about to say? What could she possibly be questioning? Emma placed a small piece of paper on the table in front of me. It was an old document, yellowed with age, and as I picked it up, I felt a chill spread through me. It was a letter, one I recognized immediately. It was from the same bank that had held Mom's safety deposit box. But this wasn't just any letter, it was a record of a transaction. A note confirming that the contents of the safety deposit box had been transferred. To Emma, the letter read. My hands went cold as I read the words. I looked up, my throat tightening. "Emma, what is this? What does this mean?" Her expression was unreadable. "It means, Lucy, that Mom didn't just leave the jewelry to you." I stared at her, trying to process the words. "What do you mean?" "Mom gave it to me. She said it was mine. Mom changed her will," Emma interrupted, her voice steady but firm. "She left it all to me, not you." I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath me, as if the air itself had thickened, making it harder to breathe. The paper in my hand suddenly felt like a weight I couldn't bear. I blinked, stunned. "No, that's impossible. She told me. She gave me the letter. She said it was for me. It was mine. My voice faltered, and I found myself struggling for air. Emma's face softened slightly, but there was still a certain coldness to her eyes. "Lucy, I know this is hard, but Mom changed her mind. She left me everything. Everything that mattered to her. I was the one she trusted to handle it. I was the one who made sure everything was settled." I shook my head, the tears threatening to spill. But the letter, the key, the jewelry, I thought it was for me. I thought she meant it for me. "Why didn't you tell me this? Why didn't you?" "I didn't know how to tell you," Emma admitted softly. "I thought you'd understand. I thought you'd see that it was what she wanted. But I see now that I was wrong. I should have been more upfront with you." I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You knew? All this time you knew what she wanted and you didn't tell me?" I felt a fury rise inside me, a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and heartbreak. Emma stood up too, her posture rigid. "I didn't want to hurt you. But the truth is, Lucy, I've always been the one who took care of things. I've always been the one who kept everything together. Mom trusted me, and I didn't want to disappoint her." I stepped back, the room suddenly spinning. The jewelry, the inheritance, everything that I had thought would define me, would connect me to my past, now felt like a cruel joke. It wasn't mine. It had never been mine. I looked at Emma, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know who you are anymore." She flinched, as if I had struck her, but I couldn't stop. "I don't know who I am either." The silence between us was suffocating. I felt more lost than I had ever felt in my life. The world had crumbled around me, and all that was left was the fractured bond between my sister and me, a bond that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. Emma reached out to me, her expression softening. "Lucy, I'm sorry. I never wanted it to come to this. But I'm here. I'm still your sister." I looked at her, my heart breaking with each passing second. The pieces of my past, the legacy I had thought was mine, had slipped through my fingers. But in that moment, I realized something that Mom had tried to tell me without words, that family was never about the things we inherit. It wasn't about the jewelry or the fortune. It was about the love we gave, the memories we built, the connections we shared. And though everything else had unraveled, maybe that was the one thing I could still hold on to. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said softly, but even as the words left my lips, I knew that the road to healing would be long, but not impossible. We were still family, and perhaps that was the most valuable inheritance I could ever receive. As I turned to leave, Emma's voice stopped me. "Lucy, wait." I paused, not sure if I was ready for another conversation, but somehow I knew that whatever came next, we had to face it together. For better or for worse. "Maybe we can start over," she said. "Not from the beginning, but from here." I nodded, the tears finally falling. "I hope so." And so we began again. Two sisters, forever linked by blood and history, yet still searching for a way to move forward.